I was at a cybersecurity event in a university, and a cybersecurity student, his name is Oliver, told me that he's very passionate about ethical hacking, but according to him, it doesn't have good work-life balance. Therefore, he wanted to know which cybersecurity specialty to choose. Now, I'll be honest with you, his question took me by surprise. Not because his statement is not entirely accurate, but because I realized there is so much misconceptions about cybersecurity specializations, especially for people who don't work in cybersecurity. Which one has the best work-life balance? Which one pays more money? But more importantly, which cybersecurity specialization has the largest number of entry-level roles? Because not every cybersecurity specialization is beginner-friendly. Therefore, to help you make the best decision when it comes to starting a career in cybersecurity, I'll be covering the best and worst cybersecurity specializations based on work-life balance, enjoyment, money, and availability of entry-level jobs. I'm gonna rank the specializations in a tier list from S for super all the way to F for fail. And at the end, I will reveal to you the absolute best of the best cybersecurity specialization, especially when it comes to landing your first cybersecurity job as a beginner. But more importantly, I will also show you the absolute worst of the worst cybersecurity specialization that you must absolutely avoid. Now, I'll be honest with you, just like Oliver, I also struggled with this. When I was starting my career in the early 2000s, I also wanted to be a hacker. I was obsessed with it, but my journey was full of challenges, and I've changed my mind so many times, and I've also changed my career direction so many times. So my goal from this video is to help you avoid making the mistakes that I made, and hopefully on the way save you so much time and money, and help you be more strategic when it comes to landing your first cybersecurity job, and also plan for a long-term successful career in cybersecurity. Most of us wanted to work in cybersecurity because we wanted to be hackers. I certainly did, especially after watching hacking movies in the late 90s. The ethical hacker is someone who hacks into a company with the goal of finding weaknesses, and then they create a report and send it to the company to show them those weaknesses and to help them fix those weaknesses. Now, in terms of work-life balance, a lot of ethical hacking actually happens after working hours or in the weekend, so that the ethical hackers don't interrupt mission-critical systems during business hours. Now, some activities can happen during working hours, but doing things on the weekend or late at night is very common for ethical hackers. However, an important point about work-life balance when it comes to ethical hacking is that ethical hackers need to study a lot. They need to be on top of all the new hacks, on top of all the new techniques, and on top of all the new tools. My friends who do ethical hacking and my colleagues, when we go to engagements, they always tell me about their latest projects on the weekends and how they exploited these new vulnerabilities. It is something that you need to consider if work-life balance is important to you. Now, generally speaking, in cybersecurity, yes, we need to be on top of new threats, but when it comes to ethical hacking, the demands are actually really high. Now, when it comes to enjoyment, those who are really passionate about ethical hacking tend to really love it. They love to break into new companies, they love to test out new tools, and in fact, it's usually their hobby. So outside work, they have their mini hacking projects. So if you're someone who loves this type of work, then getting a job as an ethical hacker or a penetration tester, you will really enjoy this type of job. Just an important note about enjoyment and fun can change over time. When I was early in my career, this was my hobby. I loved nothing more than breaking servers and fixing machines and doing mini hacking projects. However, today I actually have no time or interest to do this type of work. So just keep in mind that enjoyment and fun are things that can and do change over time. Now, when it comes to money, almost all cybersecurity jobs pay well, including penetration testing or ethical hacking. However, if I was to compare ethical hacking to other cybersecurity jobs, I'd say they don't really pay the best. This will of course vary between countries and between companies, and of course it will all depend on seniority. However, given the amount of effort and skill required for ethical hacking, I think they are not paid enough. I would love it if organizations actually pay them more, but it's also one of those jobs that you don't choose to do just to get rich. I mean, yes, you will get paid a lot of money, but in terms of cybersecurity, cybersecurity jobs, it doesn't pay the best. And finally, when it comes to entry-level job availability, yes, there are some ethical hacking jobs that are entry-level. However, it's actually one of the worst jobs to do as an entry-level candidate, just because there aren't a lot of those entry-level ethical hacking jobs available around. Most jobs require a lot of technical experience, advanced level certifications, and they require you to have high-level technical certifications such as OSCP, for example. Therefore, most cybersecurity professionals don't typically start in ethical hacking. I know a lot of you have, but broadly speaking and statistically speaking, ethical hacking is not the most beginner-friendly job. Therefore, with all that in mind, I would still rate it as A, just because it's one of those jobs that tend to attract the most people to the cybersecurity profession. And I will always have a soft spot for ethical hacking. However, the next specialization is one that probably the majority of you will end up doing in some capacity as your first cybersecurity job, which is SOC Analyst. SOC Analyst stands for Security Operations Center Analyst. Your job is typically to detect, analyze, investigate, and respond to cyber attacks. You typically sit in a security operations center with other analysts, and you are at the forefront of defending an organization from cyber attacks. It's a very important job. Now, when it comes to work-life balance, a SOC analyst job is the kind of job where you will get called at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. in the morning because there is a cyber attacks. There is typically shift work involved, so you could probably work evenings or mornings, depends on the organization. However, I really want you to listen carefully, because this is not a rule. Yes, a lot of SOC analyst jobs have after hours and on-call, shift rotation, or 24/7 availability. However, I have seen so many security operation centers where the analysts are just sitting there and barely doing anything. In fact, I worked with an organization where we found that some of the SOC analysts play video games during working hours. So it really depends on so many factors. It depends on how big the organization is. It depends on how well the detection and response processes have been set up. There is also a chance that level 1 SOC is managed by what we refer to as a third-party managed service provider. So you have an external company doing the 24/7 monitoring, and they escalate certain things to the in-house analysts. So not all SOC analyst jobs have bad work-life balance. I've worked in both. I've seen environments that were horrible, and I've seen environments where was very reasonable. It was mainly a 9 to 5, but we still have the occasional attack that we needed to respond to. So please don't be scared from SOC analyst work just because you heard people say work-life balance is bad. Yes, it can be, but that's not a blanket rule. In terms of enjoyment, usually it's a very enjoyable job because there is a lot of variety. You could be responding to phishing attacks, or you could be responding to malware attacks or user access problems. So there is so much variety. In fact, I think this is one of the main advantages of starting your cybersecurity career in a security operations center, because you get exposure to so many areas. The security operations center analysts typically get to interact with so many teams within the organization. They talk to the networking team if there is something with the ports, or if there is something they need to block. They talk to the GRC team to report on risks. They get to talk to users and sometimes to even application owners. So it's a role with so much variety, and it can be an excellent starting point for your cybersecurity career. Now, in terms of money, as I said, all cybersecurity jobs pay really well, but on the junior level, SOC analyst will not pay you the best. However, there is so much upward potential. So in the grand scheme of things, yes, SOC analyst actually can get paid so much money. I've got friends who also progress to things like SOC manager or principal incident responder. There is so much room for upward movement because the type of responsibility that you have as a security operations center analyst is really huge. You are protecting the key critical assets of the organization. Therefore, the more senior you get, the more money you will make. And finally, as for entry-level job availability, I think SOC analyst is one of the best roles for an entry-level cybersecurity candidate. There is just so many SOC analyst roles available for entry-level candidates compared to other specialties. So if you study and you follow the roadmaps on my videos, chances are you might land a SOC analyst role or a generalist cybersecurity role where some of your tasks are SOC analyst. Therefore, my overall rating for SOC analyst roles, especially for entry level, I'd say they are definitely S tier. Now, the next role is one that most beginners and even intermediate cybersecurity professionals skip because a lot of people don't even know about it. It doesn't have flashy job titles, and it doesn't have all the hype that ethical hacking jobs have. However, it's an absolute secret weapon for someone who wants to land their first cybersecurity job because it doesn't require so much technical skills like other cyber specialties, which is GRC, which stands for Governance, Risk and Compliance. GRC is not one role, it's actually a group of roles where you perform things like risk analysis, compliance analysis, you write reports, you conduct assessments. Typically, we refer to it as non-technical in the sense that you don't really configure tools or install tools. For example, you're not the person who configures Splunk. However, you need to know what Splunk does. You need to know why we need it. But more importantly, you need to understand how risk management works. You need to understand cybersecurity frameworks, how they work, why we need them, and all of that. It's a field on its own, and it has so much opportunities. Now, when it comes to work-life balance, it's hands down the best cybersecurity specialty for work-life balance. The work is really organized. It's a typical 9 to 5. There is no such thing as something broke middle of the night, and you're not the person responsible for responding to cyber attacks. So most work happens during work hours, and it's not really a stressful job. Now, when it comes to enjoyment, if you look online, some people will say GRC is boring. And yes, it can be. In fact, anything can be boring. However, I must clarify that if you work in an organization and some auditors come to audit you, meaning you are at the receiving end of an audit, this doesn't qualify as you having GRC experience. The auditor who audited you is the individual with GRC experience. Therefore, some of the people who are sharing GRC advice online actually haven't worked in GRC, but they try to guess what it's like. I find GRC work really varied. I get to work with so many teams. I get so much exposure, but also as I've gotten more senior, the type of GRC work that I do get me into rooms with decision makers. I work with audit and risk committees, with CIOs, sometimes CEOs, and the work is really high level and strategic. So when it comes to enjoyments, it really varies between each individual. I say the work can be enjoyable if you actually know what you're doing and you understand what the job's for, and the more senior you get, the more enjoyment and impact you can make. Now, when it comes to money, the roles typically pay really well, and the higher you get, the more salaries you get. In fact, at the highest level, when you're someone like a chief information security officer or a senior executive, those roles aren't really technical roles. Like the head of cybersecurity is not a chief hacker. They're actually business people with understanding of risk management and yes, some knowledge of technology. I've seen crazy salaries at the extreme higher end. Think your global banks. Some of those senior executives get close to 7 figures if we factor in the bonus. Now, that's not typical, but it certainly happened. However, I haven't seen those numbers for technical roles. So this is something you need to keep in mind as you're planning your cybersecurity career. Now, as for entry-level job availability, like I said, this is a secret weapon. Having GRC knowledge will open so many doors because, like I said earlier, it's actually not just one role. There are roles like security education and awareness, there is risk analysis, there is audit, even technical cybersecurity roles. If you work in a small to medium-sized organization, you're actually expected to do more than one thing, and a lot of these tasks can fall under GRC. If you want to know more about GRC, I've actually broken down all the roles of GRC, and I gave you a step-by-step roadmap on how to study and land your first GRC job in this video. Make sure to check it out and follow it through for a full plan. Now, when it comes to rating, especially when it comes to entry level, but also for upward mobility, if you want to get into management or leadership, I think GRC is definitely a steal. Speaking of upward mobility and progress, the next specialization is one that you will never see any videos talk about, but it's really important if you want a long-term career in cybersecurity and if you want to be someone who makes real impact on the cybersecurity program of an organization, which is cybersecurity manager. I said manager just to refer to all leadership roles, which means you could be a manager of a small team, you could be a people manager, or you could be a director who manages multiple managers in massive teams. So cybersecurity management roles are really diverse and varied. For example, you could be managing a group of GRC professionals, or you could be a security operations manager, or you could be managing a group of penetration testers. So it really depends. However, you could come across job titles such as cybersecurity manager. They're more managing technology, so that could also consider management. Now, as for work-life balance, all the managers that I know, including myself, are extremely busy people because you have your day-to-day job, you need to report to executives, you have clients, and on top of that, you also have people management and technology management. So it depends on the organization. I'd say management is not the most relaxed role. However, when it comes to enjoyment, management, if you're someone who like to manage people, you like to think strategically, you don't mind the report writing, then management can be enjoyable. I enjoy it at this stage of my life. However, if you're someone who absolutely loves technology, you love to be in the tools, you love coding, and you want to be doing the hacking, then management can be an absolute nightmare for you. I've seen so many really good technical individuals get promoted to management roles and they absolutely hated it. So it's definitely not for everyone, but it's also not as bad as some people make it out to be. I enjoy it. I know so many people who enjoy it, but it's certainly not for everyone. Now, when it comes to money, as you may have guessed, the more responsibilities you have, typically the more money you will get. So if money is something at the top of your priorities, then you need to plan to get into management at some point. However, when it comes to entry level, of course, there are no entry level management jobs. However, in extreme cases, I've seen individuals who moved from law enforcement and other types of career, and their first cybersecurity job was a management role. But to be fair, those roles were more people management more so than typical cybersecurity management. And to their credit, they actually took the time to learn and grow their cybersecurity skills. It happened, but if you're someone who's trying to land your first cybersecurity job, you typically don't start out as a manager. Now, with all that in mind, my honest rating is B. Yes, management can be great, money can be great, but it also comes with its own headaches. Now, if you're someone who never wants to become a manager and you absolutely love technology, you want to do the hacking, you want to analyze the malware, then there is a pathway for you, which is the next specialization, which is threat analyst or security researcher or even malware reverse engineer. All of these roles typically are highly technical roles. Typically they are senior roles where you're someone who's analyzing advanced threats. That could be researching new techniques, researching threat nation actors, or performing reverse malware engineering. Those are highly technical roles and they are ideal for someone who just want to focus on technology and they don't want to do anything related to people or people management. Now, when it comes to work-life balance, yes, there is after work hours when there is a serious attack or a new threat, but usually it's not that crazy. Again, it depends on the environment, but broadly speaking, from what I've seen in the industry and from the teams that I manage, it's not that bad. When it comes to enjoyment, it's highly individual. I can never see myself doing this today, but if you asked me 20 years ago, I would have told you this is a dream job. Now, the people who do security research and malware research, they are in love with it. They talk about it all the time, and it's also their hobby, really similar to ethical hacking. In fact, one of my good friends is a world-renowned security researcher at Microsoft, and I've interviewed him here on this channel. In this video, check it out if you want to learn more about security research. Now, when it comes to money, it's one of those specializations that require so much technical skills. Similar to ethical hacking, I prefer if they got paid more, or at least on par of the skills that I think they have. Now, if you work somewhere like Google or Microsoft, of course your salary will be really high and you'll also be someone who's extremely senior. However, on average for local organizations, I'd say the salaries are average. They are still good because they are still cybersecurity jobs, but if you compare it to other specializations, I'd say it's average and I would love for them to get paid more. Now, in terms of entry-level job availability, I'd say it's really bad. It's not an entry-level job. You're expected to have a lot of experience, and usually individuals start as SOC analysts or ethical hackers and then they move to something like security research. Now, with all of that in mind, especially when it comes to entry-level job availability and all the other factors, I'd say my rating would be C. Now, speaking of advanced technical roles, the next specialization is one you will probably see in movies and TV shows. It's a niche on its own. You can perform it in the military or in three-letter intelligence agencies, but you could also perform it in the civilian world, which is the forensic investigator. Now, a forensic investigator is someone who analyzes the evidence as part of an investigation. That evidence could be a hard drive, it could be memory, it could be a laptop or mobile device or any type of device. Now, if you perform it in the civilian world, usually this is part of the security operations center. It's actually part of incident response where you do forensic investigation on compromised machines to see what's really happened. Whereas in law enforcement, it's a completely different story. In law enforcement, you'll have an ongoing investigation, and as part of it, you get to analyze the mobile physical device or the laptop of a criminal. Now, this is where things could get really dark, but I was lucky enough to interview someone who actually worked in an intelligence agency in the counter-terrorism department. Part of what they did was forensic investigation and analysis of crime. I talked about it at length in this video. Check it out if this is an area you're interested in. Now, when it comes to work-life balance, it's not the best because there is really tight timelines and high-pressure deliverables that you need to deliver them quickly. But this is one of those jobs that you do it because you want to make a difference in the world. Therefore, when it comes to enjoyment, I'd say the enjoyment is usually high in these roles because you get to see the impact of what you do immediately. Now, when it comes to money, unfortunately, it's not that high, but then again, no one gets into this type of job for the money. It's still good, especially at the senior levels, but it's not the best. And finally, when it comes to entry-level job, the answer will actually surprise you. There are entry-level jobs for forensic investigators, but the pathway is usually not typical. For example, you could start as a police officer and then later move to something like the electronic crime unit, where they will train you on how to perform forensic analysis. So that could be considered entry-level jobs. Now, in the civilian world, usually people start as SOC Analyst or GRC or any specialty really, but then they upskill and learn more about forensics, and then they're able to move to a pure forensics role. But if we compare it to something like SOC Analyst or GRC, there aren't that many entry-level roles. However, it's definitely possible. Now, with all this in mind, my honest rating is A, and this is purely because this is the type of job that you do if you want to make a difference. However, it's not the easiest job to break into if you are a beginner. Now, the next specialization is one for those who don't want to analyze things. They don't want to use tools. Instead, they want to build their own tools, which is the cybersecurity engineer. Now, the title cybersecurity engineer can actually mean so many things. You could be a network security engineer that deals with firewalls, proxies, and all the networking tools. Or you could be a cloud security engineer where you exclusively work on cloud security. You could also specialize in one tool. You could be an identity and access management engineer that configures SailPoint or CyberArk, so you really are a tools specialist. Another place where I see the word engineer thrown around is for automation specialist. So you could be someone who writes Python scripts to automate certain things in a security operations center or on a GRC team, or pen testers. You could be called a security engineer where you just automate things. So the word engineer can mean so many things. Now, when it comes to work-life balance, yes, some things need to be built after work hours or on weekends, but typically it's not that bad. I'd say it's slightly better than a SOC analyst, but it's not as good as something like GRC. Now, when it comes to enjoyment, honestly, I don't know. There are some people who really love this type of work, whereas others really hate it. In fact, as part of my job, I coach junior consultants and junior engineers, and a lot of the engineers tell me that they want to move to another area of cybersecurity. They feel like automating things and building tools isn't really what they want to do. Instead, they want to respond to cyber attacks, or they want to perform ethical hacking, or they want to design a roadmap for GRC, meaning they tell me they don't feel that they are doing pure cybersecurity because a lot of the roles are actually network engineering or systems engineering. They just have the word security in the title because the device or the tool that they're working on is used by the cybersecurity team. So this is definitely an issue that I've seen repeatedly with security engineers. But some people absolutely love this type of work. Now, when it comes to money, I'd say it's average. Usually people who perform this role are early in their career. They do it for a certain period of time, then they move to something else, or they progress into something else. Some people do it for the entirety of their careers, and that's perfectly fine. But all things considered, I'd say the salaries are average, meaning they're actually good. But when it comes to entry-level job availability, I'd say it's not the most beginner-friendly job because you're expected to have some sort of technical knowledge. For example, if you're a network security engineer, you need to be a really good network engineer first. Then you sort of learn firewalls and whatever tools you work with, and you do that as a job. Or if you specialize in something like Splunk and you want to be a Splunk engineer, usually you work in a security operations center and you take an interest in Splunk and then you learn it and that becomes your job. So it's not the best. Now, with all that in mind, I would rate it as D. It's an okay job. It's not something I actively recommend new people to start with. And to be honest with you, I've seen the biggest egos in cybersecurity usually comes from young guys who have the title engineer. They have a chip on their shoulder and they tend to create toxic environments for everyone. I must stress, they are the minority, but it certainly happens. Now, the next specialty is one that I know most of you will ask me about, which is the cybersecurity architect. And the reason is because they pay so much money. The cybersecurity architect is someone who typically designs solution, or they do long-term planning. They look at the cybersecurity end to end. Now, to be honest with you, this falls under GRC, but it's always performed by someone who have a lot of experience. This is not an entry-level job. This is something you can aspire to after you've spent years working in cybersecurity. Now, when it comes to work-life balance, it's one of the best. It's similar to other GRC jobs. You work 9 to 5. You're not the person to be called at 3 a.m. when things go wrong, and you don't typically do things after working hours. Now, when it comes to enjoyment, it is an enjoyable job if you enjoy making impact or if you're designing things that you're passionate about. But again, if you're someone who wants to do the hacking, you want to do the coding, then this is not a job for you. The day-to-day job of a security architect consists of meetings, Google research, Word documents, PowerPoint, and Excel spreadsheets. It's not hoodies and hacking and blinking lights. However, if money is important for you, then this is one of the jobs that pays the most money because it's performed by someone with a lot of experience and they bring a lot of value to the business. So the more impact and the more experience, the more money you will make. And finally, when it comes to entry-level job, the answer is zero. There is no such thing as an entry-level security architect job. Even if you're someone who comes from 10 years of experience in IT, you can't jump into a security architect job. You can be an IT architect or a cloud architect, but when it comes to cybersecurity, you have to put in the time in cybersecurity because the designs you will make and the decisions you will make will impact all of the cybersecurity team and it will impact the security posture of the organization. Now, with all that in mind, I would say B, simply because it's not accessible for beginners. Which leads us to the ultimate big reveal. Which one is the best of the best when it comes to cybersecurity specializations and which one is the worst of the worst? I will first tell you the worst of the worst, and it's none of the jobs that we just mentioned. The worst of the worst and of cybersecurity jobs that I don't even consider it a cybersecurity job is the cybersecurity instructor. This is someone who has never worked a day in their life in cybersecurity, but they teach you classes on Udemy and Cybrary. Now, I'm not referring to the university lecturer who teaches in a university. That's a different story. That's a researcher. And I'm also not referring to someone who works in cybersecurity and teaches on the side. I'm talking about those instructors who exclusively teach. The problem is their courses are extremely low quality. They have no concepts of what we do, and they simply repeat things that they read in books that they don't even understand. This is a job that I don't recommend to anyone because honestly, it has no advantages. And the worst part of it is I see the biography of some of those instructors and they say they've been working in cybersecurity for 10 years. I look at their profile and they've been a CompTIA instructor and a Cybrary instructor. And bonus points if they are a top poster on Reddit. Those people definitely deserve to be the worst of the worst, and you will never see any organization hire them for any serious role. Which brings me to the absolute best of the best when it comes to cybersecurity specializations. And it's not what you think it is. Drum roll, the best cybersecurity specialization, especially for beginners, is the job that you will get. Meaning it's not a single specialization. If you want to land your first cybersecurity job, you should apply to as many cybersecurity jobs as you can, as often as you can, and you should take whatever job that's offered to you. That job is the absolute best of the best job for you. Let's say your first job is a SOC analyst or a GRC analyst or anything. Take that job, learn as much as you can. I don't want you to be attached to a certain specialty and be fixating on one path. I want you to have an open mind, take any job that you can get, and use it as a starting point for you to grow your skills, to grow your knowledge and your experience. Then you can specialize in anything you want. You can literally learn any topic you want in cybersecurity, and with the experience that you gain from that first job, you can use it to move to a higher paying job in the specialty that you want. Therefore, if you want to land your first cybersecurity job, I highly recommend you approach it from a generalist point of view. In fact, in this video, I have a step-by-step roadmap that will get you to learn cybersecurity in the fastest and cheapest way possible. You will get broad skills and broad introduction to cybersecurity that will qualify you to a large number of jobs, which you can use to land your first cybersecurity job. Check it out and I'll see you there.